Now, gender-based violence continues to be a harsh reality for many people in this country. We've seen public outrage and calls for perpetrators to face justice one too many times. Horrific stories of femicide and GBV emerge on social media every day. Today, we're looking at the role that the criminal justice system plays when it comes to dealing with GBV suspects. Now, are perpetrators being brought to book, and does the punishment actually fit the crime? Lisa Vetten, gender activist and researcher at UJ's Faculty of Humanities, joins us now. Lisa, very good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. So, first question is, are perpetrators being brought to book in the numbers that will satisfy yourself and, I suppose, the general public?
Yes and no. I think one of the concerns is that cases that get a great deal of public attention and are prioritized and are high profile, we see justice being delivered. But I think for the ordinary person who doesn't have access to social media, who isn't politically connected, who doesn't attract attention, justice for them is still a very long way off. But I think it's important to have a look at the criminal justice system as a whole and to see what's happening within the systems. And I think the systems tell us some very troubling things about the capacity of the state in order to be able to effectively prosecute and convict. If I can give an example in rape, what's really quite concerning is that if you look at the National Prosecuting Authority statistics over the last 5 years, they show an increase. If you look at the percentage, they're telling you the percentage of cases that are resulting in a conviction is increasing. But if you look at the actual number of cases that are being put down for trial, then the sad reality is that they're putting down only the same number of trials, rape trials, as they were 10 years ago. So that while their percentage might be going up, the number of cases that are being tried is actually decreasing. And that is deeply concerning, because what it means is that they're pushing up their statistics, but doing so by putting further cases, fewer cases on the roll, which means that for those victims whose cases are never tried, there is no justice for them.
It sounds like you're saying they're literally just putting the cases on the roll that they're sure they can win.
That is unfortunately appears to be the case. And what part of the problem is, I think, what I'm going to call audit culture. When you set people performance indicators and you tie promotions and bonuses to that, there are all sorts of reasons why conviction rates are quite a difficult way to measure performance. And so what that means is that people are going to find ways in which to fiddle or game the system in order to achieve their performance targets. But it's going to come at the expense of cases which are more complex, which take a longer time and may be more difficult.
Let's look at the sentencing. Maybe also look around the world. Are we sentencing perpetrators? Is the punishment fitting the crime in South Africa?
Well, what is very interesting in South Africa is that our use of life imprisonment has increased by about 800% since 2000, and it's increased the most rapidly in the world. So we are sentencing very harshly, but having a harsh sentence means nothing if you are convicting fewer and fewer people. The deterrent is the likelihood of being caught and convicted. It's not the likelihood of going to jail for a very long time. So we have to focus on getting things like arrest and prosecution much better, improving that. What's also concerning is that if you look at the NPA's annual reports, it's quite clear that they're using alternative dispute resolution. That means mediation, and this is in the case of adults. By law, you're allowed to do this with children, but not with adults. And so it's very concerning when you look at the NPA statistics in their annual report to see that they're using alternative dispute resolution in rape. Rape carries a minimum sentence. It should never be allowed to be mediated. One is seeing something similar going on with domestic violence. That too is being mediated. Now, it might be that there are some cases which you can mediate, but you've got to have very, very clear guidelines and regulations that say what you can mediate and what you can't mediate. What is the quality of training of people who mediate? And unfortunately, we have no such guidelines within the National Prosecuting Authority, and we don't have any guidelines within the courts in relation to domestic violence either. So that's a very big gap. And mediation mediation is sometimes highly inappropriate and puts people at risk. So it's really important that we match this rhetoric of harsh sentencing and deterrence, and we take the crime seriously, with the fact that that some cases are being pushed out of the system and into mediation.
Talk about the fact that you want to get the cases that are going to the court are the ones that are more winnable. This also speaks to the capacity of the police to a certain extent. We were talking about the DNA backlog, but you find within the police there's poorly collected DNA samples. There's so many issues, aren't there, before that case even gets to the MPA?
This is it, and I think this is where we have to look at, it sounds very boring, but you have to look at state systems, the ability to administer and manage, because that is where so much of our weaknesses lie. If we talk about the police, and I'll speak about the police in relation to domestic violence, when they don't enforce the act, they are supposed to be subject to internal discipline. But it's very clear from their own records in their annual reports that discipline for misconduct has declined dramatically within the police over the last decade, which means it's very hard to hold them to account when they don't do what they're supposed to do in relation to domestic violence. It's a managerial issue, and it's the kind of thing that we need to get right if we are to have any kind of, if we're to make the system effective and to make women believe that they will get justice and they will be protected if they go to the police.
Just on that protection point, what is the state or the police doing in terms of protecting the victim before the case or while the case is on trial?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, I think if I move away from focusing on the weaknesses in the state, if I look at civil society, there's been an absolute decline in the quality and amount of research that's been done on the criminal justice system also over the last decade. So it's really very hard to get a sense of how the systems are working. We get these well-publicized, high-profile cases in the media, but we don't really know what the reality is on the ground. And I mean, you can periodically see that there are unquestionably police officers who are doing a good job. I mean, I was quite impressed to see some research recently that showed that there were a quarter of police stations who could both refer women to shelters and knew people at the shelter sufficiently well to be able to say to women, phone this person, this is her number. And not only that, the police officers still phone that woman the following day to say, have you been helped? Were you given the assistance you were needed? But we have 3/4 of the police who don't do that. So there's really, there are a lot of gaps that we don't properly understand and where we're not seeing the everyday practice of justice being executed as it should, in terms of simple things like just getting somebody to a shelter. And if I want to speak more broadly, we also really haven't touched on the question of what is the role of the health sector in ensuring that women who come in, who've been quite clearly beaten up and obviously abused, what role is the health sector playing in referring women to further protection to police stations or at the shelters? That question hasn't been asked in over 20 years, unfortunately.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much for your thoughts, Lisa Vetnia, and for your facts as well. Gender activist and researcher at UJ's Faculty of Humanities, talking to us about this. But the question is, does the punishment fit the crimes? Now,